craft sector were important for us for everything. बिना funding के कुछ नहीं होता. And particularly in the crafts sector, people who are involved with craft know how challenging it is to get funding for the craft sector. So I really hope that with the panel that we have today, we're able to throw some interesting light on how some of these challenges can be overcome.
I'm Ramanjanelu, currently working as Director in Department for Promotion of Industries and Internal Trade, Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. I as Director has been looking into the One District, One Product initiative of the government. This initiative is basically, it's a transformational step towards achieving Atmanirbhar Bharat goal. So how do we achieve that? Every district has its own potential in the form of products, in the form of business, and in the form of ecosystem established there. So what we have done in the ministry is that we have tried to identify niche products, then the ecosystem of the artists, weavers, and craftsmen, and other people who are engaged with developing, producing, and trying to export, trade with these products are also involved. So under this initiative, we work closely with Invest India, which is one of the institutions promoted, and where the institution gives us professional help and support to the government. So we have a dedicated team there, and they are closely engaged with the states, with the industry, trying to first have the product list finalized from every district. And of late, what we have done, we have asked all the district collectors to be the OEM persons who are trying to see the quality, the importance of the product, that it adds value to the district and to the whole country as such. And then it's been onboarded onto the government e-marketplace, which is the e-commerce platform which the government has provided for government procurements. So why government procurements? This has to be traded, this has to be sent out of India or have more trading across the states. Government has many products which is being used for its own purpose, and also there are pleasantries within the ministries. So what we try to do is that we wanted to include the Indian products which reflects the true culture, which, you know, the what we would say that some of the crafts are on the verge of extinction. So to give a platform for them, to give support, this is not kind of a financial directly, but indirect support. And that's how we've onboarded them onto the government e-marketplace. And now the ministry is involving the Indian missions abroad to see that they use these products in their exchanges and pleasantries exchanges. So that's how we try to give wings to the products that represent India's culture and heritage, to see that it's going abroad on overseas. So that's the introduction that I would like to give. Perhaps we can continue the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm audible. My name is Chintan Bakshi, and as Sandeep mentioned, I'm from an organization called CICO. We are the incubation center at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And the connect with craft for us is that I take care of a vertical within CICO, which is called CICO Nest, where we work in regions. So while we have the main center in Ahmedabad and we have a larger staff there, but we also manage smaller centers in the regions along with local partners. So in Jaipur, in Guwahati, in Indore, etc. And in fact, I'm based in Jaipur, and we have been running that center since 2013 along with the Rajasthan government. Around 2016-17, when we were doing a program, and that's the link with crafts, when we were doing a program called Invent, which was to support social entrepreneurs from Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, these two states, and a few other low-income states, we realized that we were getting a lot of applications from entrepreneurs who were working with craft clusters, or they were working with a particular craft and trying to create a product or a business model around it. But it was difficult for us to take them to our investment committee because they did not have a scalable business model. It was working well at a small scale, but they were not sure how it would scale, or they hadn't thought through it. A lot of the entrepreneurs were typically designers, majority of them, and perhaps they were not able to look at scale, were not able to look at other elements that typically we look at when we are evaluating a startup, a tech startup, like unit economics and how do you leverage technology and things like that. And that's how we started supporting these kind of craft entrepreneurs, in the hope that some of them will be able to come up with validated, scalable business models, and either we or external investors would be able to fund them. So since then, since 2016 or 17 when we started, we would have supported about 32, 33, somewhere around that number of entrepreneurs who are working very closely with craft clusters. So these would not be artisans themselves who would have set up an enterprise. These would be entrepreneurs. It could be designers. It could be, some of these are engineers also, not with a great grounding in crafts, but who are using technology in some shape or form. And they're working with craft clusters or a particular craft or a set of artisans, and then trying to create a business model or a product, or in some cases the intervention can actually be a technology which an artisan can use, and maybe I'll give a few examples later. So we have done about 32, 33 that we have supported, and about 15 that we have also financially supported, maybe 6 or 7 as equity and others as small grants. So that's basically what we have done, maybe more later.
So hi, I'm Vipul Jain, and I must say that somehow we have a lot of representation from IIM Ahmedabad. Sandeep is my batchmate, and of course we have the incubation center at Ahmedabad,
Though
which
I'm
is
from Bangalore, but I spent more time in Ahmedabad.
That's not your fault.
but I must say that for the first time some of the management institutes are beginning to look at cultural and creative businesses. So both IIM Bangalore and IIM Ahmedabad, both of them are quite active in this area. This is really refreshing, because when we passed out, all we learnt about was the finance industry and the FMCG and so on and so forth, right? Traditional businesses. So coming back to my background, I after graduating from Ahmedabad, I became a tech entrepreneur, and this was at a very early stage, right? And so it's really been I've been very fortunate in seeing how the tech industry started from near zero. If you think about the industry in the 80s, it was non-existent, right, to where it is today. And what a difference it's made to the country, right, and to aspirations and opportunities for young people, because in the back of the IT industry, a lot of other industries have also done very well. And as a tech entrepreneur, of course, we created a business. Like most entrepreneurs, we sold it, right? So this is really after that I started looking at the whole craft sector. And why craft sector? I have to thank my wife for that. My wife is Shibani Jain. She's an NID graduate. She's the founder of a company called Buyer Design, and she has been working with artisans, creating contemporary products for home, for hospitality industry. And I've been visiting with her many craft centers, and when you meet artisans and you meet craftspeople, you fall in love with them, right? That's the reality. No matter, I'm not a designer, I'm not a creative person in that way, but the reality is when you see them and you see their work and you see their skill, you do really somehow feel that this is so good, right? And why don't we see more of it? So anyway, in the particularly I would say last 2 or 3 years, the whole thought turned to, why doesn't this sector scale? Why is it that you go abroad and you attend exhibitions? Why is it that there are so few Indian brands that work with artisans that are out there? In fact, if you think of organizations that have scale, there are probably a handful, right? I mean, Fab India, Jaipur, the marketplace, Jaipur rugs, these are some examples. But why only these? India has such diversity, such capability, no other country has. We have this huge, huge competitive advantage when we compare ourselves with the rest of the world. And, you know, I'm sure over this and over the next few days there will be many discussions around this. But certainly when I compared this industry to the IT industry, then one clear, I would say, enabler for growth is the availability of finance. When we started in the IT industry, there was actually no venture capital system. ICICI Securities were the first to actually start offering venture capital to the IT industry. Fast forward to today, there's this huge ecosystem built where you have angel networks, you have seed funding, you have incubators, you have organizations that provide you with, you know, your first institutional check, growth capital, and of course, as you scale, the opportunity to get larger private equity funds. And this whole ecosystem of finance that's been built has led to such energy. You know, today I think if a young person graduates from an engineering college or from a management college, you know, his first aspiration is not to join a consulting firm or a bank or an FMCG company. His first aspiration is, oh, I must do my own startup, right? And the fact that capital is available, right? And therefore it's really your talent, your ideas, your hard work, and all of that that really come to the fore is so, I would say, transforming. And if you look at this sector, right, the handmade sector, what is really called the creative and cultural sector, right, there is huge paucity of capital. And you know, capital is something that has a herd mentality, right? So if somebody starts and makes a success and those success stories are known, then more capital follows that, right? Sometimes too much capital follows and you have these bubbles. Well, we are still far away from a bubble in this space, but certainly I think we could be at a starting point of seeing, you know, capital coming in, because along with capital also comes a certain professionalization of the business, a certain management approach, and so on and so forth. And it's all these ingredients, right, that are going to be required for organizations to scale. So when we look at this whole creative, cultural, and circular economy sectors, then we think that capital is really one of the first things. So that's how we have started a fund, a venture fund. It's called Hearth Ventures. One of my co-founders is in the audience, Shifali Chachi. We have another co-founder, Vinayak Kamath, the three of us. We said, let's plunge in, right? Let's make a start and let's create some success stories. So that's really where we are coming from. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more during the rest of the session.
My name is Anubha. I am the General Manager and Regional Head of SIDBI. SIDBI is the apex bank for financial institution for MSME sector in India, that's micro, small and medium enterprises. So we have about 2 lakh crore balance sheet, and we work with the entire end-to-end spectrum of micro, small and medium enterprises, starting from very small home-based workers to the biggest of the MSMEs having thousands of crores of turnover. So that's what SIDBI does. There are 2-3 things which are very close to my heart. One is, artisans economy. That's very close to my heart. I've worked with a lot of clusters, artisans clusters, by virtue of being in SIDBI and also in my personal capacity. We funded several of them, including Bhagalpur silk weavers clusters. Then we worked in Odisha. We are right now working with the Zari Zardozi cluster in Delhi slums, and then Lucknow chikankari. We worked with Seva. And so I was on a sabbatical from SIDBI for 3 years. So for 2 years I was with UN Environment, and in UN also we worked very closely with Seva and their work in Kutch, Run of Kutch and Bhuj and places like that. And then for a year I was running my own angel investment platform, which is particularly meant for impact oriented startups. So in a year we did 11 deals. We haven't done any artisanal startup per se, but then I guess at the end of the day it is the same story if you talk about finances and you talk about funding. However, giving it so when you talk about artisan sector, then of course there is a lot of on-ground impact, there's a lot of measurable impact, and there's a lot of self-reliance which is coming through interventions in these sectors, and that's how we look at it. I mean, making these sectors sustainable, profitable, and have a kind of a long-term goal of empowering the artisans. Thank you.
So, as we all know, we're talking about how is it that the craft sector has evolved, should evolve, how is it that can be more attractive for people who are funding the sector. As we all know, the craft sector basically began as a creative self-expression, right? It was very local, it was linked with the local culture, with occasions, with festivals, and so on and so forth, and gradually became an economic activity. It didn't really start as an economic activity, and largely has remained kind of unorganized. Now, obviously, for it to sustain further, it needs to evolve. I think we all accept the fact that it needs to evolve in some form or the other to remain relevant in today's society, and not just remain commercially viable, but become commercially profitable. Because only if it becomes commercially profitable will it be able to attract funding with so many other emerging sectors competing for the same. At the end of the day, every industry is competing for the same set of funds, and the investor will obviously put his money where he'll get maximum return. Now, you mentioned, Vipul, about the IT revolution and how that kind of attracted funding and has transformed itself. Now, if you look at two other revolutions that happened in India which kind of transformed rural community, one was the Green Revolution, which we all know about, and Green Revolution was largely grassroots level, driven by technology, pushed by the government, with not too much participation of the private sector, because at that time perhaps the private sector was not so evolved as it is today, but they later joined the bandwagon and continued the momentum. Then of course you had the White Revolution, which was milk, which was driven largely by production efficiencies and started showing what marketing intervention in terms of product, in terms of packaging, in terms of distribution would actually do to an entire thing. Now the question is that, are there any learnings from these revolutions, you believe, that can apply themselves to the craft sector? Now I was trying to think that if you had a revolution in the craft sector, and that was green and that was white, what would you call a revolution in the craft sector? The only thing I could come across was a rainbow revolution, because you have so many myriad of colors and things in the craft sector. So what is it that we can actually do? What is it that funding agencies can do to make a rainbow revolution happen in this country? Who is it who will take over the mantle of the patrons and the nobles and the kings who used to patronize this sector and keep it going and fund it? Who is it who can really take up that mantle? Who can be the champion? And how is it that we can make that happen? Chintan, when we were discussing this earlier, you said, we need to look at what are the different kinds of funding that are available to people. What is it that investors look for? And how is it that we can create disruption?
No, yeah, I think very interesting thoughts as you were, Sandeep, talking about the Green Revolution and the White Revolution, one tech-driven and other perhaps, maybe not driven, but one of the key elements in the other one was marketing and packaging and the front-end side of it. And they're sort of following the rules of the game, and they are working with a set of artisans and trying to do that. So these are the kind of interventions that startups do. Now coming to your other point about how finance or funding can play a role and why there need to be different levels of funding. So for example, what I've seen, in fact what we have seen working in the tier 2, tier 3 cities of India is that a lot of the startups that we have encountered in the craft sector, in agri, in food, we may not want to call them startups because they are not going to give the kind of 30-40% returns, and most of them will also not get funded by the typical conventional venture capital funding. A lot of them may grow 10, 15, 20%. A lot of them are not asset heavy MSMEs that they will go to a bank and they'll get collateral. So that's, I think, the middle ground which is getting squeezed in. And incubators are playing a role. So we are basically giving them, let's say, convertible notes, collateral free debt, these kind of things, CCPS and all these kind of things. But that's I think one of the key elements that needs to happen. And I think some of the venture capital funds which are coming up, the private sector, I mean, they will probably realize and figure it out that there needs to be more instruments to support the growth of a lot of these high growth companies which are probably working with one craft and helping that craft come to a certain level. Having said that, so that's one part. We have also seen typical tech startups who are doing an intervention to solve one of the efficiencies in the craft value chain. So for example, there's a company called Kosha that we have recently funded. They have an IoT device which can go on a weaving machine or a spinning machine, and it basically certifies that it's handmade based on the RPM, and then it kind of creates a sort of a barcode, and it syncs up on the phone. So there's a complete 100% transparency, and if you are exporting, let's say, to Europe and all that, there is absolutely no doubt that it's created in a village, it's handmade, it uses this material and things like that. Now something like that can have a very large market, so that will be directly VC fundable. I mean, they can scale up significantly if they are able to figure out a way to diffuse, right? I mean, they are still figuring out how to kind of get it out there and work with governments, work with cooperatives, etc. But at some point of time, they'll hit a traction that there'll be word of mouth and customer acquisition becomes easy. So what I'm essentially saying is that there needs to be capital for a lot of these high growth businesses which may not be typically VC fundable, but they will generate a 15, 20, 25% kind of a return. It needs to be a blended sort of a thing. It could be debt or something like that, a convertible sort of a debt. And at the other end, once this ecosystem grows, once that the craft, the artisan base in a way gets stabilized because there are enough high growth businesses working with crafts, then I think the tech interventions will come. It's not going to happen one after the other, but I think it's kind of going to happen simultaneously. So there's a need for venture capital. There's also a need for more blended finance to help these high growth businesses grow.
Anubhai, you also have, I think, a similar view on how different kinds of funding can come into play. So while everyone these days is just tempted to look at venture capital or look at startup funding, but that is not the only source of funding. I mean, सिर्फ वही नहीं है funding. फंडिंग आजकल जब हम सोचते हैं तो उसी मायने सोचते हैं. अब उसमें प्रॉब्लम ये होती है कि जो वेंचर कैपिटल में फंड करना चाहता है वो तो एग्जिट देखता है, वो हाई ग्रोथ रेट देखता है, वो टेक्नोलॉजी डिस्रप्शन देखता है, वो कंपेटिटिव एडवांटेज देखता है. अब इस तरह की चीज़ें क्राफ्ट में होना थोड़ा मुश्किल है, समय लगता है, इतना पे बैक उसका ये नहीं है कि 1 साल में या 2 साल में उसके प्रॉफिट बनने वाले हैं. सालों साल से कोई जो चीज़ चली आ रही है उसको ओवरनाइट टेक्नोलॉजी डिस्ट्रप्शन करना भी बहुत मुश्किल है. तो तरह तरह के देयर आर मेनी सोर्सेज ऑफ फंडिंग, एंड आई थिंक क्राफ्ट पीपल नीड टू बी अवेयर ऑफ दैट यू कैन access many different sources of funding. Don't just look at one source of funding, and I think Anubha, you can throw some light on that.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. We talk essentially from the VC perspective. अगर हम venture capital की ही बात करें यहाँ पे, तो obviously high risk asset class है, तो venture capital requires 10x kind of growth story in every venture that they are investing, and very importantly an exit route कि आप venture से exit कैसे लेंगे, that is also very important for them. But I'll still believe that it is craft sector could be less riskier than several of the other kind of businesses which are typically enterprise SaaS or SaaS based models and all, because it's very tangible in nature. And if you look at a return story of a VC fund, then essentially I don't think it goes beyond 20% kind of overall portfolio return. तो अगर हम उस तरह के रिटर्न की बात करें, तो इफ़ यू टॉक अबाउट अ रोबस्ट आर्टिजनल बिजनेस विच इज़ बैक्ड बाय टेक्नोलॉजी, विच इज़ बैक्ड बाय AI ML एंड लॉट ऑफ good talent which is going in this sector. So, and a profit with purpose kind of a model. So I don't see any reason why it should not be VC fundable. And particularly when there are certain dedicated funds which are working in this domain. Then there are other sources of funding which are very active and people are innovating on those. For example, revenue-based financing, which is gain currency. Then you have iSafe. These kind of funding models are also there, which are working. And a kind of blended finance can work very beautifully here, because I was just reading a report wherein I saw that some even in CSR funding, some 20,000 crore funding in CSR has gone to the kind of NGOs or not-for-profits wherein the tangible impact measurement cannot happen. So in these sectors, like artisanal sectors, the tangible impact measurement can happen very easily. It's way better than several other sectors wherein you आप मिट्टी का घर बनाते हैं और वो बारिश में अगली बारिश में बह जाता है. It is something which is very tangible. We've seen scalable business models. हमने लखनऊ में देखे हैं, हमने कच्छ में देखे हैं, हमने मुरादाबाद में देखे हैं. So if you kind of blend the finances with maybe VC funding with CSR funding, and of course debt-based funding, and several other products also which are being innovated these days. So I don't see for good businesses in this sector there is any dearth of money, and the kind of bubbles we've seen. 21 was a great year for the startup sector, but 22 we've seen a lot of them crashing down, and the funding. But we're talking of funding winter or maybe a funding autumn. So I think it's a more all-weather kind of a business, the artisanal sector and the craft sector, rather than something which is purely SaaS-based and which can go this way or that way. So that's my take on this.
So I'm Preet. I'm part of the One District One Product team at Invest India. One District One Product, I'm sure Ram sir would have already covered. We plan to support at least one product from each district of the country, put them onto the world map, which means opening up e-commerce markets, opening up exports markets, ensuring better packaging, ensuring better quality, adherence to standards, bringing in newer designs, bringing in functional design, bringing in any other sort of aesthetic interventions that make the product better. Our support that we have discovered till now is getting people together, discovery. The shortcomings we've realized are very high on the packaging side, on the unboxing experience side, on how you treat the buyer, how you treat the product, the sort of longevity with which you give this to somebody. I totally agree with the two panelists that I had the fortune to hear, that it might not give you 30x, 40x returns. So you probably need to look at traditional sources of informal financing, because for a bank to count on a skill and give you a loan is not how they make their money or how they keep our deposits safe, which means traditional sources of finance might have to be tapped into. By training, I am a finance PhD, and economics is very core to how I think honestly. One of the issues that I have with a lot of discourse when I meet artisans, when I meet a lot of folks from the sector, my thing is, one, should we support the craft sector for the sake of supporting the craft sector? I am not 100% there, right? Unless there is a craft that is able to showcase utility, unless there is some value, unless there is maybe a startup or a very pertinent reason to showcase craftsmanship, unless it gives the user some utility, which could be luxury for all it matters, right? If all those are not there, every day we will keep moving towards automation, towards machine-made things, towards mass production, and which in a lot of scenarios is diametrically opposed to how our craft sector currently is, right? So I definitely feel that for a lot of products, just for the sake of beautification, that market might be shrinking faster than we would want it to. And the luxury market, which might again be just for the purpose of beautification, but something that screams craftsmanship, that market is bigger than we have tapped into. So yeah, that's probably how I think what I do.
So just to continue in what you're saying, and then maybe one or two other people also can join in on that. And I think it's an interesting point that we have more than 3,000 or whatever number of crafts in this country, and it would be near impossible to actually promote all of them. You know, I mean, they would not probably, if you say that it requires X amount of money to promote one craft, and then you multiply that by 3,000, then you would probably have to spend 50% of the GDP doing that, right? So clearly there is some degree of prioritization, and by very definition, your initiative, because it calls itself one district, one product, you have prioritized. So how do you do that? I mean, how can that, A, how do you do that? And B, how can that process be made transparent if it is not so? And, you know, how do we make it fair?
You know, I mentioned this earlier, and it's nice that Chintan mentioned that, you know, if something is handcrafted, it needs to reach the customer with that guarantee, with that seal saying that it is handcrafted, it is that material. So, you know, these certifications play a very important role. The second thing, you know, that Chintan mentioned, just amazing. They are, what did you say? They are able to better tell the story, better communicate the value of the craft. I think that is the most important thing. The most important thing, you know. You see a Bidriware vase, and you know, you can honestly just pass it by while strolling through Kolaba, right? Whereas you see something with all the information. This is a great example of showcasing or communicating the value of a craft, right? You see something beautiful and you say, you know, this is a rare craft. You know, these are all the people who worked in it. You know, it took 150 hours of actual work on the craft, and maybe 30 lifetimes worth of heritage that you are holding in your hand. You know, you say that when this artisan curated this, the artisan thinks of this maybe a paper mache elephant or something. They think of this as a member of their family. You know, suddenly what you are holding in your hand is a slice of India. What you are holding in your hand is something next to a living, breathing heritage. You know, it screams luxury. So that is another component that we've been trying to do. I think they were very helpful. In Ladakh, I think we did that with Pashmina weavers. We've been working with the terracotta artisans to curate things that are more appealing to, let's say, the market in the Middle East or the market in Europe, right? And how do we ensure that the blue pottery that we have from Jaipur does not have a lead certification problem? Because otherwise you can't do anything, and then it's not child safe, right? And people don't want to buy non-child safe things, especially in Europe. So how do you take care of these minor issues? How do you take care of, let's say, chipping in Azamgarh black pottery, right? Their problem is that, you know, the road connecting the artisan's house to the nearest port has too many bumps for it to remain as it is, and chipped materials come back from customs. And of course, I also mentioned in the previous instance that for an artisan, a lot of times a return is an ego issue. A return is a matter of pride that my product had come back, you know, somebody rejected my produce, and you know, they need to think of it more as a business. And or you know, how we have thought of doing it is that you divorce the producers from the sellers. Not every producer is a seller, not every seller is a producer. The sellers can, like I think we had Zook the other day, and Zook is doing exactly that. That, you know, if I know I am going to get 30% returns, I will factor that in on my margins, and the return never has to go back monetarily or socially to the artisan. So the artisan is happy that, you know, my produce is going somewhere, they're making money, it is figured into the cost of the product. So your MVP then includes 30% plus, right? So divorcing those things, discovery of those things, showcasing things better, training them for better designs. These are some of the ideas we have, but open to more suggestions always.
Ramanji, coming to you, you know, how does the government view this? Because, you know, oftentimes I've seen in my past experience that the government would rather give 10,000 rupees to 1 lakh people than 1 lakh rupees to 10,000 people, right? Yeah. And sometimes that can work at cross purposes, because that 10,000 rupees may just not get anyone off the ground, right? So I agree, in some way that the specialization, selection, etc., is important. But how does the government view it? I mean, would they be open to that kind of a thing when it comes to especially funding?
Yes, I take your point because government has many priorities as such, and as we've seen the phase that we passed through, the government major focus was to contain the pandemic. So the priorities for the government at that level are different. But then, yes, the products that we are talking today, the craftsmanship that we are talking today, also is part of Indian culture and heritage. And some way the government has to chip in and see that a minimal kind of a support has been to be given so that the industry can come forward, take it up and then take it forward. Now we have investors. Do we have investors in the audience? I'm sure we have somebody of them. So anyway, what does investors see? Like we've been discussing with venture capitalists and others, that there should be some return on the investment that's made, and then after that there should be an exit plan. Fine. Let's take the return that is being the most important thing. Forget about the exit plan. So once you see that there is a return which is being seen, then how do you prioritize the products? How do you make them, see, I would use the word contemporary, because now we are seeing a flood of products from other countries. There are so many imports. Now with the imports, we see that the Indian culture or the products are really relegated to a background, because one, utility, the other point that it is contemporary because it's usable. Your utility, its purpose is served. And then you take, for example, some pottery made from earthenware, and then it's a big one. One is that it may not be so aesthetically designed that we see imports now, and then to make it go to the world stage or even have go to different states. So these are all things that an investor would look at. So what the government does is, one is that how the products can be prioritized based on the utility. First, you need to increase their presence in different places. Once you increase the utility, then the government looks into what are the different avenues that we can include the industry for one part, and then how can government give in their part. So it is actually a collaboration of a way forward that the government looks at, because everybody knows that we want minimum government. We don't want intervention from the government. You want the platform to be given to the industry to play out, get the new ideas from the industry, and see that wherever that minimal approach or a push, or I would say nudge, it is required from the government, that is given. So I would say, I was also speaking at the other event, government now has moved itself from direct involvement in funding to indirect ways of doing things. For example, I was just discussing about how the products are being given e-commerce platform onto the government e-marketplace. So there is some kind of a caution money or a deposit money which is required for every seller, and now we know that sellers are really not that funded. We hardly have some of them. For example, if I take an example of Karimnagar silver work, there is kind of an association for that, and people have some kind of resources, but I don't think you will find such kind of resources with all the craftsmen, weavers and others. So for them, even a small benefit from the government side, for example, that you remove that small caution money of 50,000 or 1 lakh or even 10,000, it's a big relief for them, because they can showcase the products onto the e-commerce platform and then they get that marketplace. So the government has moved from direct to indirect ways. So that's how the government has changed its role, and also seeing that the startups, now we're discussing about startups and venture capitals. So what the government does is it coordinates with these venture capitalists and startups and sees how that these startups are given a platform through the government guidelines, because we have a startup program run by the same Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So we have certain guidelines and we say that startups may be included in these sectors, because again government prioritizes work because you see the larger effect and the economy. So then once the guidelines are formed, then the startups and others are encouraged, then they can get into all the issues of packaging, branding, its aesthetics and other issues, because that's where we require technological intervention. As one of the co-panelists was saying, that IT has really grown. So that kind of technological intervention is there from the startup, and that's how the government, gives us that platform for the industry, startups and venture capitalists to play about, and then they also come back with suggestions. They say that we have done this is where we have moved, and probably we require government support here. Then that is taken up. So that's how the government role has changed from a direct intervention to see that there is a minimal government, but then the industry is flourishing. Enabler, yes, that's why we facilitate. Earlier we used to, when there was green revolution, white revolution that we were discussing, that's where the government really was in the driver's seat.
Think of it.
That's where the government really had to be there, because we did not have a lot of participation. I mean, the industry was still going. The industry was going. So you see the government, how it's changed from 1970s, 80s to current situation. So yes, the government is there, but it's sort of slightly invisible. And whenever the door is knocked, yes, we are there to help out. So that's how the government goes.
So, for the rainbow revolution to occur, you really need both a bottoms up as well as a top down approach, right? I mean, if you look bottom down, you're really talking about skill development, you're talking about clusters, you're talking about creating artisan networks, and which all have a fairly long payback, right? And then if you look at the top down, you're really talking about market-led initiatives, aggregators, retail online websites, craftpreneurs as they are now called, or design-driven. So Vipul, how, as a venture capitalist person, how do you see both of these will require funding, right? Bottom up also requires funding, and top down also requires funding, and both are not mutually exclusive. So from your perspective, how do you see it? I mean, I don't see you investing in the bottom up. I see you investing maybe in the top down, right? But how do you see that? What are the trends? What do you think are the challenges which you must be having all the time, craftspeople or people from that sector coming to you? What is this? Why do you reject them?
So, from where, I'm talking about both angel funds, incubators, venture funds. The focus here is the entrepreneur. Okay? The first thing that you will actually look for is the entrepreneur who has the skills, the vision, and then the skills to execute. Right? And I think this is really important, because one thing that I think has changed and must evolve is that when we talk about the craft sector, everybody talks about artisans. And in the past, the artisans were close to their markets or to their patrons. So they could directly understand what the customer wants and supply. The markets have changed. The markets have become urban, or they have become global. What people used to consider utility, that whole concept has changed. So the market has moved away from the artisans, and this is a reality, right? There's no point, trying to back forward and say, oh, if things were different. So today, if the artisan's work is to reach the customers, there is actually a very big role of designers, for one. Okay? And we must understand that designers come with a certain capability and a mindset which an artisan may not have. Some of them can graduate, so it's not which is better or worse, but the fact is that you require design input. You require very strong marketing input. I think this has been echoed by everybody there. You require technology input. Right? So, the ecosystem where earlier it was artisans and they were directly or through what you call middlemen, which were not adding great value, right? But which were getting those products to customers. Now you need entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs who could be coming from craft backgrounds or from any other background. In fact, it's very interesting. Over the last 15 months, we have funded 5 organizations. Okay? In one case, it's 2 ladies, right, who are actually techies. They were in the US. They were working for the technology sector, but their passion was, handmade, Indian apparel, right? So they started off this venture to sell sarees to the Indian diaspora, get the right value from the customer for a great product and great convenience. And if you get enough value, there's enough for the for this organization to do well, and the weavers to do well, to create demand, and therefore everybody in the chain benefits. So the point I'm making is that one mindset change is to say that when we talk about this sector, let's start saying, oh, it's only artisans that we need to work with. Okay? Of course you need to work with them. There are many issues that need to be done in terms of building up their skills, creating their workshops, improving their productivity, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, that's only one part of the value chain. The remaining parts of the value chain are equally important. And only when you complete all the dots are you really going to get the right product to the customers. And so that's where the entrepreneurs come in. That's really the entrepreneur's job. I mean, I think the government has been promoting Indian craft and so on and so forth. They do a lot of exhibitions, etc., which is great. But at the end of the day, when he said that the government is stepping back, right, and saying, how can I influence the system indirectly? I think that's the right approach.
We are more enablers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are more
and,
enablers.
And it has worked. To come back to the IT industry, this whole concept of fund of funds that invests in different types of funds has worked very well, right? Because anybody who's starting up a fund, whether it's an angel fund or it's a venture fund, does require an anchor investor. And who better than the government through one of its bodies to be an anchor investor? So I'm saying that there is a role for everybody. The value chain needs to be completed. We need to we need to be very ambitious about the customers we want to reach. And I want to say this, that there are many tailwinds that we can leverage. Technology, right? He talked about technology for authentication, really important, because designs are so easy to copy. You find products made in China that look like Indian handicraft products, right? So technology for authentication, technology for just bridging the difference, the distance between a designer and an artisan, between the marketplace. So technology, marketplaces that have emerged, e-commerce, communication, all of that. So from our perspective, and I think many of us who are looking upon this, that we have to create successful businesses, right? The core of it is really about finding great entrepreneurs.
So realistically speaking, I mean, if you look at the two things, bottom up, top, it's really the top down, creating entrepreneurs, getting more people who are interested in this sector, who are able to bridge that, design, communication, technology gap.
So rather than top down, I would say looking from the customer backwards.
Yeah, that becomes top down.
Outside in, right? Yeah. Looking for what do customers look for? What do they want?
And who is in
what
the best
is the
position
value?
To understand
and
that.
Who is the customer? There are different
so
types of
why
customers.
do you think we have why do you think we don't have enough of these entrepreneurs there? I mean, are there not enough role models or what?
So I'll tell you why. Okay, my whole
and
theory.
Any of you can answer that question.
Again, in the past, we have always looked at artisans and this whole sector as isolated from business mainstream. Okay? So, for example, how many business people coming out of business schools look upon this sector as a viable sector? Right? 20 years back, maybe nobody. Today they are. Today, management schools, like I mentioned this in my introductory talk, management schools are looking at creative and cultural businesses as an important economy, and we must, because I want to remind everybody that in terms of livelihoods, if you look at, I'd say the world, but certainly when you look at India and you say, what is India's biggest challenge, right? It's really about creating meaningful livelihoods. and the livelihoods that this sector is already created. I mean, the estimates range from 200 million artisans to 6 million artisans, right? That itself says how lacking of data we have. But the point is that next to the agricultural sector, this is the most important sector to create livelihoods. If you look at SDG goals, this is the sector that impacts a lot of SDG goals. The fact is that there is a tailwind where the young people, they actually want to do something which is meaningful, which is good. They want to buy responsibly, they want to consume responsibly, right? Even the people, even funds, social impacting, ESG, that is, there is really so much interest in that area. I don't need to put money down a black hole and hope that some of it sticks. You can actually be quite capital thrifty and create businesses of some scale, and by doing so, you will be creating value.
On the same point as to why what Vipul was saying, that the focus needs to maybe not, kind of be more on entrepreneurs who are working with artisans. And it's already happened in the government. If you look at the agri-tech sector, I don't think the government is trying to create farmers as entrepreneurs. Government has understood that farmers can't be entrepreneurs, they can be good producers. So organize FPCs, FPOs, give them credit, etc. Somehow this understanding, unfortunately, has not seeped through in the government as far as the craft sector is concerned. I don't know what the reason is.
But
I think
what Ramanji was saying, it seems to be happening.
Yeah, so but there are at least 20 to, I don't know what the number is, but 20 to 30 times more accelerators and seed funding that the Ministry of Agriculture or Invest India would have given to agri-tech sectors. I saw a post today on LinkedIn. One of our agri-tech startups, his idea had started 15 years back in the PUSA, in the incubator in the PUSA, Agri Institute. So that means they had something for startups 15 years back. I don't think any of the NIFTs or NIDs, NID has an incubator, maybe 2, 3, 4 years old, but it's somehow not seeped in that sector. The government or whoever are the stakeholders are still trying to make the artisans as an entrepreneur, and don't look at this layer of tech entrepreneurs like the agri-tech. There isn't a term called craft tech. ऐसी term ही नहीं बनी है अभी तक. Agri-tech is, there are millions, billions of dollars of VC funding which has now started coming into agri-tech. But somehow that thing has not happened. I don't know the reason, because the dynamics are very similar. The scalability issues that were there of trying to buy food products from a farmer, quality issues, traceability, communication, all of these things are very, very similar. There are, of course, some more complications because it's a physical product and some manufacturing is required, but I think tech can solve a lot of that. Somehow it's not happened. I think that I just thought I'll mention.
Yeah, I'll just add and continue to the discussion that you just had. Just want to understand how many times the industry and corporate world has really taken up our products for gifting purpose. Can you have any data? I don't think. We do have gifting in the corporate sector with respect to very few products. Brass was used sometime back. हो गया, वो दिन खत्म हो गया. Probably we are still into that silver and the Bidri work from Karnataka, silver filigree from Karimnagar, probably blue pottery, and Pashmina is always evergreen. That's still there. But apart from these products, please tell me how many times the corporate world, the business world, in the industry has really promoted our products, even for a small purpose like gifting. Forget about other uses. Utility बहुत है, but at least gifting utility कितना promote किया है. So what the government is doing now is, what I would also have, kind of a request or a proposition, that let the industry identify certain products which have contemporary, they have value, they add to the aesthetics, they add to the gifting value, and they also recognize the art form. There are, and I've given a few parameters. They can be added, subtracted, whatever. And you start using these products, promote them in your own way of dealing with people, and tell them that storyline. This product comes from this place. This is how it's made. Now add another, another point of being economically, environmentally friendly, because that's more important. Because you see the products from China, I'm sure they don't really stick to the environment angle. Okay, so then you can promote by saying that not only they are from the Indian heritage and reflecting culture, but then they are environment friendly, and look at the utility and look at the story. So once you start giving this kind of inputs in all your interactions, wherever you go, I'm sure the industry travels the world. So this is an opportunity for you wherever it is feasible. Please speak one or two words about the product.
So, yeah.
That is my that's my small proposition from the government side. Now what the government will do, when the industry is trying to promote certain products which are prioritized, because you need to start somewhere. There are thousands of products for us, but we need to start somewhere, and the industry agrees for that. So you start off somewhere, see that you give the traction, required momentum for the products, see that there is a lot of media presence also involved, and then once there is some issue, some point that the government also needs to come in, like when I was introducing myself, I told about Indian missions. That's why the government is going to, also has already taken up upon itself, that we have urged all the Indian missions, wherever they have the meetings, wherever they have, the kind of areas where their pleasantries exchange, and where there is an area to promote products, Indian culture and heritage, we are urging them that the Indian missions should promote this product.
So like you said, I mean, marketability, the government is doing things to market, but what we really need are entrepreneurs to come into it. That is what will attract funding. Entrepreneurs that can bridge that gap between the artisans and the marketplaces, both in terms of understanding the products that can be marketed, how to communicate them, and how to market them. Now, since we just have another 5 minutes, in fact we are slightly over time, but doesn't matter, we started late, I would like to open it to the audience. If any of you have any questions, please, this is a good time. Yeah.
I work with the craft sector, in the sense I work with the leather industry, and my introduction with this craft scenario has been through Iti and Mickey, but I work differently. I work with a lot of American companies, and we do handcrafted leather for the American market, European markets, right? Now, the intervention that we are talking about here is quite interesting. You're talking about like agri-tech, so you're talking about something called craft tech, where you need designers to have intervention with the artisan and the craftsman to really bring value to the table. And there were a couple of instances that you mentioned, that there was an American duo who's designing the product, and it's working backwards to the customer and then to the manufacturing facility. How do we bridge that gap? Now, a small entrepreneur, he does not have the collateral for the artisan to bring in the fund, right? That is question number one. Question number two, the artisan who's working, he does not want to educate his children, their future generations. They are not interested because it's not viable. How do you keep the interest intact? And how do you expand that skill base by upskilling? Because skilling is just a concept that we hear about. There is very little impact at the ground. I think that's where probably people like you, who come into the picture, because what government says, I may be being candid, but the government initiatives, they don't really reach the ground. They just remain on paper.
What I heard the panel say really, Shyam, was that as investors, you really will invest behind an individual entrepreneur. And it is really that entrepreneur who needs to work on that value chain. And if that entrepreneur is able to bring and showcase that this is how I intend to work on this value chain at both ends, the customer end as well as the supplier end, I think that is really what attracts the funding.
Absolutely. Because we are talking about the artisanal effect. Now, a lot of people, even in the West, they are wanting things that are artisanal. Now, that artisanal product, when it's showcased to the right customer, it has to have the back-end support that can give us the volumes when it merges
Absolutely.
together, and when it's showcased,
And if you're able to demonstrate that to the investor, then
Yeah.
he's more likely to invest than
I
otherwise.
think for that maybe one-on-one,
Yeah,
interaction.
you can,
will be
I think
required. Yeah.
if you have one-on-one interaction
I'll
with
just
these
add to the
people.
point of
Thank
backward
you.
and forward linkages. What the government is now doing is, under the One District, One Product initiative, we have started collaborating with District as Export Hub, which is overseen by Ministry of Commerce. And now District as Export Hub is coming out with its own scheme. It's still in the pipeline. So in the District as Export Hub, there is a formalized institutional mechanism. You have District Export Planning Committee, then you have a State Export Planning Committee, and then you have a national level. So what the district level authority does is they identify the products. So you as an investor, you are a startup perhaps maybe, or you want to put in your money, and now you're bothered about how will I get the loan. That's first question. And then about forward and backward linkages, and to see that the artisan has that real interest. So what the government is now trying to do is that we are trying to address the bottlenecks with regard to the forward and backward linkages. So we are going to come up with that. So even though I've said that government is on the back side, then look at the amount of work that we are really looking into. So because now we're going to transform it into a scheme, and then we will be addressing those value chains, because if you want to manufacture a product, there is a certain value chain. So we will try to see how this value chains are worked upon, and wherever the bottlenecks are there, with the government intervention, we will see that the bottlenecks are reduced or eliminated. So one question, 1 second. Yeah, that's fine. So that's why we have an institutional mechanism. And with respect to your loan, I think you already have a credit guarantee scheme which already does away with your collaterals. We don't require collaterals under credit guarantee scheme. But then you need to fit your bill into those guidelines that the government has given. Because the government is for everyone. It cannot fit into one person. So there is a general guidelines given. If you fit your project into that, yes, you will be given the funding.
Great.
So I am sure both the questions have been answered.
Yeah, anyone, any other question? हाँ जी, बोलिए.
अपने काम के साथ साथ जो आपकी स्कीम्स हैं उनके लिए इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के लिए भी मैंने काम किया गांव में एसएचजीज के साथ में, बट जो मेरे अब तक के एक्सपीरियंस रहे हैं बहुत अच्छे नहीं रहे हैं. मैंने भी अप्लाई किया बट मैं सक्सीड नहीं हुआ, बट मैंने कभी गिव अप नहीं किया. आपकी एसएचजी वाली स्कीम्स मोस्टली होती हैं आर्टिजन्स के लिए, लेकिन आर्टिजन सेक्टर एक ऐसा अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर है जो एसएचजी में तो क्या वो 4 जने भी एक साथ काम नहीं कर सकते. तो गवर्नमेंट्स की स्कीम मोस्टली एक एसएचजी वाले या सोसाइटी वाली स्कीम्स हैं. एक स्कीम्स गवर्नमेंट की जिसमें फंडिंग आप लोग करते होंगे, शायद सीएफसी का आता है. कई जगह सीएफसी बनी है, मशीनें धूल फाँक रही हैं, बंद पड़ी हैं, इन्वेस्टमेंट सब. हमें कौन से ऐसे इन्वेस्टर्स हैं या कौन से ऐसी फंडिंग से जो हमें मिल सकती हैं? मेरे पास मेरी क्राफ्ट्स में विपुल संभावनाएं हैं. थोड़ा सा मैं आपको उसके बारे में डिटेल में बता दूं. मैं बेसिकली पॉटरी का काम है, सिंह सर ने भी बताया, और पॉटरी में मेरे पास एक लार्ज चेन है. आपका मिनिमम हाउस होल्ड आइटम से लेके लग्जरियस सेगमेंट तक की रेंज मेरे पास है. इंटीरियर, आर्किटेक्ट्स, गार्डन, एवरीथिंग सेगमेंट का मेरे पास पूरा डिज़ाइनिंग का. एंड जो उसकी सबसे बड़ी बात है कि जो मैं प्रोडक्ट कस्टमर को देना चाहता हूँ एक ऑथेंटिसिटी के साथ और एक जेन्युइन क्वालिटी प्रोडक्ट देना चाहता हूँ. बट मेरी प्रॉब्लम आ रही है फंडिंग की वजह से मैं उन चीज़ों को प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ मास लेवल पे और उनको आगे नहीं बेच पा रहा हूँ. तो मेरा आपसे यही निवेदन है कि आप मुझे कोई इस तरह से डिटेल्स आप दे पाएँ. धन्यवाद.
Thank you.
तो जयपुर में आपने मिट्टी हब करके एक स्टार्टअप का नाम सुना है? उनसे आप कांटेक्ट में हो क्या? उनसे कुछ हेल्प मिली आपको? उन्होंने आपका दे वांट इट, सो व्हाई डोंट यू कोलैबोरेट? मतलब आप उनसे कोलैबोरेट क्यों नहीं करते? ठीक है, बाद में डिस्कस.
नहीं, एक ONDC बोल के प्लेटफॉर्म है जो अभी होने वाला है, आने वाला है. सो ONDC इसमें सिडबी इज़ द बिगेस्ट इक्विटी पार्टिसिपेंट इन दैट, और भी बैंक्स उन्होंने पार्टिसिपेट किया है. तो ये जैसे आप अगर अमेज़ॉन पे सेल करते हैं या फ्लिपकार्ट पे सेल करते हैं, इस प्लेटफॉर्म के ज़रिए आप किसी भी प्लेटफॉर्म पे आप सेल कर पाएंगे. तो इस तरह से इनिशिएटिव्स है. सी हम लोग वी हैव टू मेक द मार्केट्स वर्क फॉर द आर्टिजन्स, दैट्स मोर इम्पॉर्टेंट. तो एंटायर वैल्यू चेन में आप कैसे करते हैं. एक जो एग्रीटेक के साथ कंपैरिजन हो रहा है कि एग्री में फंडिंग जा रही है, एग्री टेक की बात हम कर रहे हैं, वी डोंट टॉक अबाउट क्राफ्ट टेक. So I think agri is seen more as as a sector which has a very big market, because खाना सबको खाना है. तो एग्रीकल्चर का जो हम टैम बोलते हैं टोटल एड्रेसेबल मार्केट और वो सब जो जार्गन्स की हम बात करते हैं, बट एट द एंड ऑफ द डे एग्री इज सपोज टू बी हैविंग अ लार्ज मार्केट वेर इन जो क्राफ्ट्स हैं उनके बारे में हम यही सोचते हैं कि बहुत लग्जरी नीश सेगमेंट है, नॉट एवरी वन इज़ अ बायर. तो क्राफ्ट में हमको वो सेगमेंटेशन करना बहुत ज़रूरी है कि कौन सी चीज़ें हैं जिनका कि छोटा मार्केट है, कौन सी चीज़ें हैं जिनका कि मास यूटिलिटी मार्केट हो सकता है. गिफ्टिंग ऑफ कोर्स दैट्स वन थिंग, बट सिर्फ गिफ्टिंग के दम पे आई डोंट थिंक एनी क्राफ्ट कैन सर्वाइव ऑन दैट. सो इट हैज़ टू हैव अ वेरी रेकरिंग रेगुलर काइंड ऑफ मार्केट जहाँ पे मतलब आपको उस तरह का सेल्स प्रोपोजिशन होना चाहिए आपके पास. तो ये चीज़ें हैं. मतलब इस सेक्टर में देखिए प्रॉब्लम बहुत सारे हैं. जो फंड्स भी आ रहे हैं, जो वीसीज भी आ रहे हैं, दे हैव टू डिसाइड दैट दे आर इन दिस सेक्टर व्हाट इज आई मीन देयर इन्वेस्टमेंट थीसिस. आप इसलिए आ रहे हैं क्योंकि आप एक गैप, नोबडी इज इन्वेस्टिंग हियर, यू कमिंग बिकॉज ऑफ दैट, और यू हैव अ प्रॉफिट विद पर्पस काइंड ऑफ ए मॉडल, या आपको लगता है कि दीज सेगमेंट्स कैन एक्चुअली गिव यू वेरी गुड ROIs. तो इट्स वेरी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड, ऐसा बहुत कॉम्प्लेक्स है, बट देयर आर थिंग्स दैट आर वर्किंग. बहुत सारी चीज़ें हैं. जैसे आप SHG की बात कर रहे हैं, मेरा अपना एक्सपीरियंस है कि प्रोड्यूसर कंपनी जैसे एग्री में सक्सेसफुल हुआ वैसे क्राफ्ट में नहीं हुआ. हमने भागलपुर में लगवाई थी, मुरादाबाद में हमने बनवाई मार्केटिंग कंपनी, प्रोड्यूसर कंपनी. तो ऑब्वियसली बहुत फ्रिक्शन था, बहुत रिफ्ट था, मे बी लॉट ऑफ क्लैश ऑफ इंटरेस्ट एंड ऑल. तो यू हैव टू सी व्हाट मॉडल्स वर्क इन दीज सेक्टर्स, राइट. और इसमें जहाँ तक आप GI की बात कर रहे हैं, मेरे ख्याल से क्राफ्ट मोस्ट GI टैग्ड सेक्टर होगा अक्रॉस द ग्लोब. आई थिंक लॉट ऑफ जो वेल नोन क्राफ्ट्स हैं दीज आर मोस्टली GI टैग. तो आपका क्यों नहीं हुआ? प्रॉबली बिकॉज एक एंटरप्रेन्योर के लिए नहीं होता है, इट इज़ फॉर द एंटायर एरिया, जोग्राफी, एंटायर क्लस्टर. वो अप्रोच आपको देखना चाहिए कि आपके जो एसोसिएशंस हैं और जो वहाँ बाकी लोग किस तरह से काम कर रहे हैं. तो इट हैज़ टू बी ए कलेक्टिव वॉइस. तो उस तरह से आप अप्रोच करें प्रॉब्लम को. मैं एक बहुत छोटा सा एग्जांपल देना चाहूँगी. हमने अभी जरी जरदोजी क्लस्टर, वी इंटरवीन्ड इन दिल्लीज स्लम्स, जरी जरदोजी क्लस्टर. One very important problem statement that came, we could have never thought of it in our lives. Artisans said that हमारी आँखें बहुत जल्दी ख़राब हो जाती हैं, तो do something for our eyes. तो हमने कहा अच्छा ये भी एक problem. We were thinking of market development, product designing, this and that and the story and packaging and what not. तो एक basic ये issue आया. तो इस तरह से मतलब you have to be in touch with the realities कि actually क्या perception and reality could be.
Agri-tech में essentially यही हुआ है. See, agri-tech startups are not selling food products. They are basically tackling value chain issues. So even the eye problem is a problem. If we have an enabler कि हम crafts में we will be doing tens and tens and tens of accelerators across India, a lot of these problems will get solved, and we have proved it. From our own funds, we have done a few accelerators, and we have had these kind of solutions coming up.
So maybe DC
so
HandiCraft
somehow the government still doesn't get it.
Play a role.
कि यार artisan को you can't make an entrepreneur. No. You need a layer of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely.
That mindset change needs to happen, and it needs to happen very fast.
That is the main takeaway, that you really need that layer of craftpreneurs in order to attract investment and in order to address these vertical issues, because once you have that entrepreneur in there, he'll address it because it's his garage, and he's in the best position to do so. So thank you so much. We can go on and on, but I'm sorry, but I have to bring this to a close. And thank you all of you for